The sun rose over the Afghan desert like a blazing sentinel, casting long, sharp shadows across the rocky valley. Forward operating base was quiet now, deceptively calm, but everyone who had served here knew better. The desert had a rhythm of its own, the wind whispering through sand, distant echoes of artillery, and the ever-present tension that gripped every soldier's heart. Corporal Doc zipped up her tactical vest, adjusted her helmet, and checked her med kit one last time. Today was not a day for hesitation. Had earned the nickname Doc for a reason. She was the only female combat medic in her unit, yet she carried herself with a confidence that silenced doubt and inspired trust. Her teammates had seen her crawl into enemy fire more times than they could count, dragging wounded soldiers to safety without a second thought. Still, there were those who doubted her presence on the battlefield. Sergeant Briggs, a grizzled veteran with eyes as sharp as his aim, was one of them. He respected skill, but he had spent years in the field believing that women had no place in direct combat. Watching prepare for this patrol stirred a mix of irritation and disbelief within him. The briefing had been tense but precise. Intelligence reports indicated Taliban fighters had been moving closer to the base, harassing convoys and ambushing patrols. Their mission today was simple in theory: advance through the valley, gather reconnaissance, and ensure no enemy forces were positioning themselves for a strike. In reality, every mission in Afghanistan carried uncertainty and risk, and this one promised both in spades. The squad assembled at the edge of the base. Dust swirled around their boots as the sun climbed higher, casting heat that seemed almost tangible. Soldiers double-checked their rifles and scanned the rocky outcrops that lined the valley, stood slightly apart, checking her supplies methodically. Bandages, tourniquets, morphine injectors, and small survival tools were all packed neatly into her bag. Briggs, rifle slung over his shoulder, watched her. He couldn't articulate why, but something about her calm demeanor unsettled him. The other soldiers looked to her with a mixture of respect and awe. She had a reputation that preceded her. As the squad moved out, the valley seemed to close around them. Jagged cliffs loomed overhead, casting long, menacing shadows on the path below. Moved with purpose, scanning for injured civilians or enemy combatants. Her instincts were honed through months of training and countless operations, but her presence also served as a psychological shield for the men around her. Seeing her fearlessly step forward emboldened them, even if they were unaware of it. Then the ambush began. It was almost imperceptible at first, a faint snap of a twig, the glint of a distant rifle barrel catching the sunlight. Then the world exploded. Bullets shredded the air around them, striking rocks, sand, and occasionally the soldiers themselves. A deafening roar of gunfire and shouts erupted as Taliban fighters revealed themselves from well-camouflaged positions along the cliffs. Explosions sent plumes of dirt and smoke into the sky. Didn't hesitate. She dove toward the first wounded soldier, dragging him behind a rocky outcrop while assessing his injuries. Briggs shouted for her to stay back, but she ignored him. Every instinct told her that hesitation would cost lives. She moved with precision, tearing bandages from her kit and applying pressure to wounds with practiced efficiency. Another soldier screamed in pain and was already on her way, ignoring the hail of bullets whistling past her. Briggs's jaw tightened. His disbelief gave way to reluctant admiration. She was unflinching, fearless, and astonishingly effective. Time seemed to slow amid the chaos. Hands worked with machine-like precision, cleaning wounds, applying tourniquets, and administering morphine. The men around her struggled to maintain cover, firing sporadically at the enemy, yet she remained a constant force. For Briggs, watching her work was maddening and inspiring all at once. He had spent years relying on muscle, reflex, and training to survive. Yet here was a woman who seemed to command the battlefield with nothing more than knowledge, courage, and resolve. The ambush dragged on, each second stretching like an eternity. Smoke and dust filled the air, mingling with the acrid smell of gunpowder. Explosions rocked the valley, sending tremors through the earth. Moved from soldier to soldier, checking vitals and applying emergency care, all while dodging sniper fire and debris. Briggs noticed the way she never flinched, never wavered, never showed the faintest hint of fear. She was a force of nature, relentless and untouchable. Yet even amidst her bravery, danger lurked. A sudden explosion to their left threw one soldier off balance and instinctively lunged to shield him, taking shrapnel in her side. Pain seared through her body, but she didn't cry out. She adjusted her position, applied pressure to her own wound, and continued to tend to the others. Briggs felt a pang of fear he had never known. He realized in that instant that losing her was a very real possibility. The soldier he had doubted, the medic he had considered out of place, was now the linchpin holding his team together. Finally, the enemy began to retreat, disappearing back into the rocky shadows of the valley. The squad regrouped, counting heads and assessing injuries. Had been grazed and bruised, but she had saved at least 3 lives directly through her intervention. The men around her were silent, catching their breath, each processing the intensity of the firefight. Briggs approached her, hesitating. You didn't have to run into that," he said quietly, voice tinged with awe and a hint of guilt. Offered a tired smile, brushing dust from her uniform. "Somebody had to," she replied simply, her eyes scanning the valley for any lingering threat. As the sun dipped lower, casting a golden hue across the desert, Briggs realized something fundamental. Courage didn't always come from brute strength or sheer firepower. Sometimes it came from knowledge, skill, and the refusal to yield in the face of impossible odds. Embodied that principle. He had doubted her presence in combat, but now he couldn't imagine facing a mission without her. The patrol continued, tension still thick in the air. Every soldier knew the day was far from over, that danger could strike again at any moment. But for the first time, Briggs began to see not as a woman in combat, but as the soldier who might just save them all, including him. And neither of them could know that in the hours to come, that very courage would be tested like never before, in a way that would leave every soldier speechless. The valley erupted into chaos. Bullets sliced through the hot, dry air, ricocheting off rocks and kicking up clouds of sand. The distant mountains echoed with the rattle of automatic fire, and explosions erupted like drumbeats of impending doom. The squad's formation disintegrated in seconds as Taliban fighters emerged from well-camouflaged positions in the cliffs above. Each soldier instinctively sought cover, diving behind jagged boulders or any shadow that could provide protection. Corporal Doc moved with unwavering purpose. She ignored the panic that rippled through the squad and sprinted toward the first wounded soldier she saw. The man lay sprawled across the desert floor, groaning as blood seeped through his uniform. Dropped beside him, scanning rapidly for the source of injury. "Pressure here. Morphine now," she barked, her voice steady despite the chaos. Her hands worked almost automatically, wrapping tourniquets, checking vitals, and whispering encouragements to the soldier, as if the battle itself existed only in the space between her and the wounded man. Sergeant Briggs, crouched behind a boulder 30 feet away, felt a mix of fury and disbelief. He had seen her in combat before, yes, but this disregard for her own safety unnerved him. "Doc, stay back, you don't belong out there," he shouted, voice cracking over the din of gunfire. Didn't even glance his way. Her eyes were locked on the injured, her hands steady as she adjusted a bandage on a deep leg wound. Briggs clenched his jaw and tightened his grip on his rifle. He wanted to argue, to pull her back, but he also knew that she was right where she needed to be, in the heart of danger. Suddenly, an explosion tore through the air nearby, throwing a cloud of dust and debris over the squad. One soldier screamed as rocks rained down around him, striking his armor. Didn't flinch. She pushed herself up, shielding the injured man with her own body, and dragged him further behind a ridge. Another blast shook the ground, sending sand into Briggs's eyes. He blinked rapidly, trying to regain focus, and caught a glimpse of moving toward another wounded soldier. Her uniform was already streaked with dirt and blood, but she moved as if it were armor, each step measured, deliberate, and unafraid. The enemy's strategy became clear. They were attempting to isolate individuals, picking them off one by one from elevated positions. The squad responded with bursts of return fire, but the terrain favored the ambushers. However, remained focused entirely on saving lives. She applied a tourniquet to a soldier whose leg had been shattered, administered morphine to another who was losing consciousness, and guided a third to a safer position behind cover. Each life she touched seemed to defy the death that surrounded them. Briggs's anger boiled over. He couldn't comprehend her fearlessness, her willingness to put herself directly in the line of fire. "Why do you do this?" he shouted, desperation creeping into his voice. Turned her head slightly, offering a small, grim smile. "Because someone has to," she said calmly, her voice almost drowned out by gunfire. "And right now it's me." Then the valley seemed to explode further. From above, enemy and machine guns intensified their assault. The squad was pinned and panic threatened to take hold. Every soldier was acutely aware that one misstep could be fatal. Didn't hesitate. She sprinted across open terrain, narrowly avoiding gunfire to reach a soldier whose screams cut through the chaos. She dropped beside him, assessing a deep chest wound. Briggs watched, torn between fear and awe, as she guided the man's hand to keep pressure on the wound while she worked to stabilize him. Time became disjointed in the firestorm. Each moment was a mix of instinct, training, and sheer willpower, moved almost mechanically, yet with precision and compassion. She checked pulse, cleared airways, and whispered reassurances. Every soldier she touched seemed to draw strength from her presence. Briggs began to notice a pattern. While everyone else reacted with panic or cautious aggression, his focus created a temporary zone of order amid absolute chaos. It was as if the battlefield paused around her, even if just for the soldiers she saved. Suddenly, a mortar shell landed nearby, sending a cloud of dirt and rock into the air. Was thrown to the ground but immediately rose, her hands covered in blood, not just hers but others as well. She adjusted a soldier's helmet, applied a field dressing, and dragged him toward a small rock formation that provided minimal cover. Every movement was calculated, deliberate, and life-saving. Briggs realized, with a growing knot of fear in his stomach, that this woman's courage bordered on recklessness. But it was also the single thing keeping his squad alive. Then, as if the chaos wasn't enough, a sniper opened fire from a ridge several hundred yards away, froze for a split second, calculating trajectory and distance, and then bolted. She reached the next injured soldier, a young private barely out of basic training who was screaming in agony. "Hold still," she commanded. Briggs gritted his teeth. He wanted to shout at her to pull her back, but he was helpless. The medic's resolve was unshakable. Every second she spent tending to the wounded was another second closer to survival for them, if not for herself. Minutes stretched into an eternity, moved with relentless focus, her hands and mind working faster than anyone around her could process. Briggs saw something he hadn't expected. The men around her began to rally. The fear that had frozen some soldiers moments before was replaced by a renewed determination. His courage had become contagious. Even Briggs felt his anger shift into reluctant admiration. He was beginning to understand that this woman, whom he had doubted for years, was the heart of the unit, beating fiercely in the middle of absolute terror. By late afternoon, the ambush began to wane. The enemy, realizing the squad was not entirely broken, started to retreat back into the cliffs. Exhausted, bloodied, and shaken, the squad regrouped, checked her patient's vitals one last time before collapsing onto the sand herself, breathing heavily, sweat and blood mingling with the dust. Briggs approached her cautiously, his face a mixture of awe and guilt. You didn't have to run into that," he said softly, voice tinged with respect and disbelief. Offered a faint, exhausted smile. "Somebody had to," she replied, her eyes scanning the horizon for any lingering threat. Briggs understood something crucial in that moment. Courage was not about size, strength, or firepower. It was about knowledge, skill, and the refusal to yield in the face of impossible odds. Had embodied all of it, and in doing so, had not only saved lives, she had changed how every soldier in the squad would see bravery forever. As the sun sank lower, casting long shadows across the valley, the squad prepared to move forward. The danger was not over. Every man and woman knew that another strike could come at any moment. But something had shifted in Briggs. He no longer saw as simply a medic or as a woman in combat. He saw her as a soldier, the one soldier who might just save them all, including him. And neither of them could know that the true test of her courage, the one that would leave every soldier speechless, was still waiting just beyond the horizon. The valley had finally quieted, but an uneasy tension lingered like smoke in the air. Dust hung heavy, catching the afternoon sun and turning the desert floor into a blur of gold and brown. Soldiers cautiously scanned the cliffs and ridges, rifles raised, eyes searching for movement. Each man knew that survival was measured in seconds, and every second that passed without contact could still erupt into chaos. Corporal Doc moved slowly, tending to the remaining wounded, her uniform torn, face streaked with dirt and blood, yet her focus remained unshakable. Sergeant Briggs kept his eyes trained on a distant ridge, scanning every shadow. He was still reeling from the ambush, the adrenaline still thick in his veins, the terror still lingering in his chest. He had witnessed move with a fearless precision that logic saving lives while bullets tore through the air around her. He admired her courage, but admiration mingled with annoying unease. He had learned, painfully, that war was unpredictable, and this valley had more surprises waiting. Then he saw it. A lone figure emerged at the far end of the valley, moving deliberately toward their position. Briggs's pulse quickened. The figure carried what appeared to be a medical bag, slung across the shoulder, moving through the dust in a way that suggested both urgency and caution. From this distance, he couldn't see a face clearly, couldn't identify friend from foe. The radio crackled. All units, unidentified movement. Hold fire until confirmed. But Briggs felt the familiar, primal fear ignite. Something about this figure felt wrong. The figure advanced, step by measured step. Briggs raised his rifle, instinct screaming. His squad crouched, tension rippling through each man. The valley seemed to hold its breath. Briggs's fingers tensed on the trigger. He knew the consequences: one misjudgment, one delay, and someone could die. His mind raced through training, probability, and fear, but above all, one thought dominated: protect the squad. Seconds felt like minutes. The figure was almost within range. The tension in Briggs's chest had become unbearable. Then the order came over the radio: if unidentified and hostile, engage immediately. His heart pounded in his ears. He had to act. He squeezed the trigger. The first shot rang out, echoing sharply off the cliffs. The figure flinched but kept moving. Briggs fired again, then a third, a fourth, and finally a fifth. Dust exploded around the impact points. Silence followed except for the faint whine of wind over rocks. Briggs froze, rifle raised, waiting for movement, for confirmation. None came. He swallowed hard, heart hammering. The valley seemed unnervingly still. Slowly Briggs advanced toward the fallen figure, each step heavy with dread. The med kit now lay on the ground, straps torn, its contents scattered. His pulse throbbed in his temples. The closer he got, the more horrifying the realization became. He saw the medic patch. Blood pooled around the figure. Briggs dropped to his knees, disbelief and terror crashing over him like a wave. It was her. Corporal Doc. The woman who had run into bullets without hesitation, who had saved men in the face of death, was now lying motionless on the sand. His hands shook uncontrollably as he reached toward her, expecting the worst. The squad stood behind him, silent, eyes wide, the reality of what had just happened sinking in. Every soldier's mind raced. She had been hit by him. 5 shots. Then a faint sound cut through the deafening silence, a shallow, ragged breath. Eyelids fluttered. Briggs froze, his hands still hovering over her trembled. "No, no, God, no," he muttered, barely able to whisper the words. She was alive. Somehow, improbably, she was alive. Coughed, weak but deliberate. Her voice was hoarse, nearly drowned by the wind, but she managed to whisper, "Don't stop, help." Her hand, though shaking, pointed to the tourniquet she needed him to adjust. Briggs's mind was a storm of guilt, terror, and disbelief. The very person he had fired upon, the soldier he had doubted, was now depending entirely on him for survival. Around them, the squad watched in stunned silence. The battlefield, once chaotic and deafening, had contracted into this single, unbelievable moment, barely conscious, giving instructions to the man who had just shot her. Every second was a test of nerve and skill. Briggs followed her directions, adjusting bandages, pressing on wounds, and doing everything he could to stabilize her. Sweat and dust mingled on his face as he realized the enormity of the situation. His eyes opened wider, meeting Briggs's gaze. Despite the pain and blood, there was focus there, sharp, precise, and commanding. "Press here, keep pressure calm," she whispered, her voice thin but unwavering. She was guiding the man who had nearly killed her, turning the tables in the most surreal and impossible way. Briggs followed her instructions meticulously, fumbling at first but improving with every movement. The guilt and fear weighed on him, yet composure forced him to act decisively. Minutes stretched like hours as Briggs and the medic fought against the injury, blood loss, and the unforgiving desert heat. He was exhausted, shaking, and haunted by the memory of the bullets he had fired. Yet his instructions were clear, direct, and impossible to ignore. She remained conscious, guiding him step by step, refusing to surrender. Every action he took, every correction he made was the difference between life and death. Finally, the wound began to stabilize. Briggs's hands were covered in blood and his chest heaved with exhaustion, but he felt a fragile relief. Breathing had steadied. Her eyes, though weary, flickered with the same fire that had carried her through countless battles before. Briggs sank beside her, hands trembling, tears threatening to fall. I shot you," he whispered, voice breaking. I didn't know." Coughed softly, her hand brushing his. "You kept me alive," she rasped, voice faint but clear. "That's what matters." Her words were thin, but they carried the weight of truth and forgiveness, even in the middle of a desert battlefield. Briggs's guilt, raw and suffocating, began to be tempered by awe and respect. This woman, whom he had doubted, whom he had almost killed, had survived and was still commanding the fight, even through her own pain. The squad gathered around, relief and disbelief mixing on every face. None of them could comprehend the sequence of events. The ambush, the bullets, the miraculous survival. Lay in the sand, the desert wind drying, blood streaked across her face, but she had endured. Briggs remained kneeling beside her, haunted but devoted to ensuring she would live. Every soldier knew this moment would define them forever, the moment when courage, guilt, and human will collided in the heart of a valley in Afghanistan. As the sun dipped closer to the horizon, casting long shadows over the rocks and sand, Briggs realized something profound. Courage was not about brute strength. It was about knowledge, resilience, and the willingness to act under impossible circumstances. Had embodied all of it. And in the hours to come, her strength would be tested further, not by enemy fire alone, but by the delicate, impossible task of survival after the unthinkable. The desert fell into an eerie silence. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath as Sergeant Briggs knelt beside the fallen figure of Corporal Doc. Dust clung to her blood-soaked uniform, and the desert sun painted her skin in shades of gold and crimson. Every soldier around them froze, their rifles lowered but eyes wide in disbelief. The moment stretched, suspended in time, as reality began to sink in. Briggs's heart pounded violently. He stared at her, the weight of his actions crashing down like a tidal wave. His hands shook uncontrollably as he reached toward her, expecting her to be gone. The bullets he had fired, 5 of them, could have easily ended her life in an instant. His chest tightened, and the desert around him seemed to blur with heat and fear. Then it happened, a faint, ragged breath. Eyelids fluttered, her lips parted in a shallow, pained whisper, and Briggs recoiled slightly, overwhelmed. He had prepared himself for a casualty, for a scene that would haunt him for the rest of his life. But this miraculous survival left him rooted to the spot. Her chest rose and fell in uneven rhythms, blood mixed with sand streaking her face, yet she was alive. A gasp ran through the squad. The soldiers, still pinned by adrenaline and fear, exchanged stunned glances. They had watched countless firefights, countless casualties, yet nothing had prepared them for this. The woman who had run into gunfire with fearless precision was alive despite 5 bullets striking her body. The sheer improbability of her survival was like a punch to the chest. Some soldiers whispered prayers under their breath, others could not find words. Briggs, his knees digging into the hot sand, struggled to control his shaking hands. "No, no, God, no," he muttered, voice barely audible, eyes wide as he looked at her bloodied form. The realization hit him in waves. He had fired those shots. He had almost killed the one person who had saved lives so many times over. His chest tightened, guilt pressing down on him like a physical weight. The desert, once alive with chaos, now felt hollow and oppressive. Barely conscious, managed to lift a trembling hand. It was enough to guide Briggs toward the most critical of her injuries. "Don't stop, pressure," she whispered, her voice hoarse but commanding. Every word was a lifeline. Despite her pain, she took control of the situation. She had been shot, yet she was still directing the man who had nearly ended her life. Her resilience was astonishing. Briggs's mind reeled. Conflicting emotions warred inside him: fear, guilt, disbelief, and awe. He followed her instructions, hands unsteady but precise. He pressed on wounds, adjusted makeshift tourniquets, and followed every direction she could manage to give. The medic who had run into bullets without hesitation was now fighting for her own life, with him as her unlikely student. Around them, the squad watched in silence. Every soldier had faced life-and-death moments before, but none had seen anything like this. Their minds struggled to comprehend the scene. The medic, bloodied and battered, still fighting, still commanding the battlefield, even while lying on the desert floor. It was impossible, surreal, and profoundly humbling. Briggs's own actions had created the crisis, yet her courage was the only thing preventing it from becoming a tragedy. Time slowed to a crawl. The sound of the wind, the distant hum of helicopters, and the faint rattle of residual gunfire seemed to fade. The valley contracted around them, becoming a fragile bubble of survival. His breathing, shallow but steady, was the focal point of every soldier's attention. Briggs adjusted his grip on the bandage, pressing harder as she instructed. Each movement was precise. Each second was critical. Then she coughed, small but forceful. Her eyes flickered open and she looked directly at him. There was no anger, no blame, only focus. "Press here, steady, calm." Her voice, though weak, carried authority. Briggs obeyed without hesitation. Every hand motion, every adjustment, every application of pressure became an act of penance. The man who had fired the bullets was now fully responsible for her survival. The squad, watching, began to move. They set up a perimeter, scanning the cliffs for any lingering threats. Enemy fighters had retreated, but the valley remained dangerous. Yet even amid this continued tension, every eye returned to. They had seen her courage before, but this was beyond anything they had witnessed. She had survived, she had fought through unimaginable pain, and she was still guiding the man who had almost killed her. Briggs, chest heaving, felt a tremor of fear and awe. He had seen life and death many times, but never like this. Her survival was more than physical. It was psychological, emotional, and moral. She was teaching him, without words beyond the minimal commands, what courage truly meant. Even in the midst of chaos, even after the unimaginable, she remained the guiding force. As the minutes passed, conditions stabilized slightly. Her breathing became more rhythmic, though still shallow. The wound, though severe, was not fatal, yet it demanded immediate evacuation. Briggs signaled to the squad, his voice trembling. "Medevac, we need her now." Every soldier understood. Every second now mattered. Had survived the impossible, but she would not survive without rapid extraction. While waiting for the helicopter, Briggs continued to follow her directions. He applied pressure where necessary, checked her vitals, and reassured her with his voice. "It's okay, I've got you, you'll be fine," he murmured. Her eyes fluttered open briefly, and a faint nod confirmed that she trusted him, the man who had fired the shots, to carry her through. In that moment, the valley seemed to vanish, leaving only 2 soldiers bound by fear, guilt, and hope. The helicopter arrived moments later, its rotors kicking up clouds of sand and dust. Was carefully lifted onto the stretcher, still conscious enough to guide Briggs through the transfer. The squad secured the perimeter while the medevac lifted off, leaving a surreal silence behind. Briggs knelt momentarily, watching her ascend, a whirlwind of relief, guilt, and awe consuming him. In the aftermath, the soldiers would speak of this day for years to come. They would describe the audacity, courage, and resilience of a medic who survived 5 close-range bullets, guiding the man who had fired them to save her life. Briggs, haunted yet enlightened, realized something profound. Bravery is not just a measure of physical endurance or skill. It is the ability to act, to survive, and to inspire even in the face of unimaginable odds. Survival would become a legend, not only for her miraculous endurance but for the humanity she inspired in everyone present. Soldiers who had doubted her, feared for her, or even held resentment found themselves changed. In the desert valley, amid death and chaos, the measure of courage, forgiveness, and determination was redefined. And for Briggs, the lesson would never fade. He had fired 5 shots at the woman he doubted, almost ending the life of the soldier who saved so many others. Yet in the moment of horror, he had witnessed something more extraordinary than survival. He had witnessed the triumph of human spirit, resilience, and the unbreakable will to live. That moment, burned into his memory, would haunt him, teach him, and define the rest of his life. The roar of the medevac helicopter filled the valley, its rotors kicking up clouds of sand and dust that stung the eyes and choked the lungs. The men on the ground secured the perimeter, rifles raised, scanning the cliffs and ridges for any signs of returning enemy fire. Every second counted. Corporal Doc lay on the stretcher, pale and bloodied, her chest rising and falling in uneven rhythms, yet her eyes remained sharp, scanning the soldiers around her. She refused to surrender to the injury, refusing to allow panic to take hold. Sergeant Briggs stayed by her side, his hands still shaking from the adrenaline of the firefight and the guilt that weighed heavily on him. He had fired 5 shots at her, each one potentially fatal, and yet here she was, alive, conscious, and issuing instructions. The weight of his responsibility pressed down like a stone on his chest. Every movement, every action he took in the next few minutes could mean the difference between life and death. "Hold her arms steady," whispered, her voice hoarse but commanding. Briggs obeyed, pressing against the wounds to minimize blood loss. The flight medic arrived, moving with precision as he assessed her injuries. "She's critical," he muttered. "We need to get her airborne now." Briggs nodded, swallowing hard, his hands still trembling as he secured straps and ensured that the makeshift tourniquets were holding. As the helicopter lifted, sand whipped violently into the air, stinging eyes and filling ears with static noise. Gripped the stretcher, her body tensing with every jolt. Briggs leaned close, murmuring reassurances he barely felt he deserved to say. "You're going to be okay, you're going to make it." Gave a faint nod, though her lips were pale and her breathing shallow. Every beat of her heart was a fragile victory in the face of catastrophic injury. Inside the medevac, the confined space amplified the intensity of the moment. The rotor's deafening hum, the shifting of the stretcher, and the staccato reports of the flight medic's assessments created a tense symphony of urgency. Injuries were severe: puncture wounds from bullets, heavy blood loss, and the risk of shock looming over her like a storm cloud. The medic beside her moved quickly, drawing supplies, monitoring vitals, and preparing IV lines. Briggs followed instructions closely, his guilt giving way to determination. He would do whatever it took to keep her alive. Though in pain, refused to be passive. She gave terse, precise directions to Briggs and the flight medic alike. "Monitor blood pressure, IV rate, stabilize, keep talking to me." Calm, her voice, faint but commanding, cut through the noise of the helicopter. Briggs felt a strange mixture of awe and horror. The woman he had shot was now literally fighting for her life and simultaneously guiding him, transforming his panic into action. Her survival, her focus, and her resilience were nothing short of miraculous. The minutes dragged, each one a battle against both time and physiology. Briggs maintained pressure on the most critical wounds, adjusting bandages and monitoring her response. His breathing remained shallow but rhythmic, a fragile thread holding her life together. The flight medic worked quickly, his hands moving with practiced precision as he stabilized her condition for the ride to the field hospital. The helicopter tilted slightly, forcing Briggs to readjust his stance, but he never wavered. The woman beside him was alive because he refused to let go, refused to let his guilt paralyze him. Every jolt of the helicopter reminded Briggs of the fragility of life. He had spent years in combat, facing enemy fire, explosions, and death in countless forms, yet nothing had prepared him for this. The weight of responsibility, guilt, and awe pressed on him like a vice. Survival was a testament not only to her courage, but to his ability to rise to the occasion, a chance for redemption he never imagined he would receive. As the helicopter approached the field hospital, his condition required more intensive intervention. Briggs and the flight medic coordinated the handoff, carefully transferring her to the surgical team waiting on the tarmac. The moment she was lifted off the stretcher, Briggs's knees went weak. He had guided her through the immediate crisis, but her fight was far from over. Surgeons rushed to assess her injuries, but even in the haze of blood loss and pain, continued to give instructions. Prepare or monitor vitals, keep pressure, stabilize. Her focus never wavered. The surgical team worked with incredible efficiency, but the window for survival was narrow. Each action, each decision, each second mattered. Resilience was the driving force behind the operation. Briggs remained on the sidelines, torn between guilt, fear, and hope. He had almost taken this life, yet now he was a witness to the indomitable spirit that refused to succumb. The battlefield had shifted from the desert valley to the sterile chaos of the emergency room, but the stakes were just as high. Hours passed in a blur. Blood transfusions, sutures, and emergency interventions battled against the damage inflicted by the bullets. Though sedated at intervals, maintained an unbroken will to survive. The medical team marveled at her condition. The odds of surviving 5 gunshot wounds in the field, followed by a harrowing medevac, were infinitesimal. Yet she had endured, her spirit unbroken, her focus guiding those around her even when she could barely remain conscious. Briggs remained a constant presence, offering what comfort he could while continuing to feel the crushing weight of his earlier actions. He had fired 5 shots at her, shots that could have ended everything. Yet here she was, defying death and instructing him, implicitly forgiving his mistakes through sheer willpower and determination. His gratitude, guilt, and admiration intertwined in an emotional storm that he would carry for the rest of his life. By the time the surgical team stabilized her, had survived what seemed impossible. Every monitor beeped in rhythm with life restored, and the battlefield in the valley became a distant memory. Yet the lessons of courage, resilience, and human will remain vividly etched into Briggs's consciousness. He had witnessed firsthand the power of determination, the force of the human spirit, and the miraculous survival of a woman he had doubted and nearly killed. Later, as the dust settled and was moved to intensive care for further monitoring, Briggs finally allowed himself a moment to breathe. His hands, still trembling, clutched together as he whispered a quiet apology. Even in the haze of sedation and exhaustion, reached out, a faint nod acknowledging both his mistake and her understanding. The impossible had occurred. The medic had survived, and the soldier who had fired on her had redeemed himself through courage, determination, and devotion to her survival. Outside the hospital, the world seemed normal, almost mundane. The desert sun was gone, replaced by the sterile lighting of the hospital wards. Yet within those walls, a story of unimaginable courage, survival, and redemption had unfolded. His fight was far from over, but the first battle, the one against immediate death, had been won. The man who had doubted her, who had fired upon her, now understood the full measure of bravery. It was not in reckless firepower, nor in unthinking aggression, but in calm precision, knowledge, and unyielding determination. Qualities had demonstrated with every heartbeat. As night fell over the field hospital, Briggs remained by her side, reflecting on the surreal sequence of events. The ambush, the 5 shots, the miraculous survival, each moment etched into his memory with a clarity that would never fade. He had faced fear, guilt, and the possibility of permanent loss, yet through it all, He had witnessed the indomitable human spirit embodied in one remarkable medic. Corporal had survived, and in doing so, had redefined what it meant to be courageous, to forgive, and to fight against impossible odds. The rotor wash of the medevac helicopter faded behind them as the team transported Corporal Doc from the desert valley to the field hospital. The desert floor stretched behind them like a silent witness to the chaos, blood, and courage that had transpired. The sun dipped below the jagged horizon, casting long shadows over the rocky landscape, yet the battlefield's echoes still resonated in every soldier's mind. Briggs walked beside the stretcher, his uniform streaked with sand and blood, each step heavy with guilt and responsibility. Inside the helicopter, the confined space amplified the urgency of his condition. Her breathing was shallow, punctuated by weak groans, yet she maintained an almost imperceptible focus on her surroundings. Briggs followed the flight medic's instructions meticulously, checking vitals, stabilizing bandages, and keeping the medic conscious and alert. Every second was a delicate balance. Too little attention could prove fatal, too much movement risked worsening her injuries. Despite her critical condition, issued commands with the calm authority that had defined her throughout the ambush. Steady, IV flow, keep monitoring, pressure steady. Briggs's hands shook as he applied pressure to a particularly stubborn wound on her abdomen. He could feel her blood seep through the bandages, sticky and warm against his skin. Guilt pressed down on him like never before. He had fired those bullets, and yet the responsibility of keeping her alive now rested on him. His own panic threatened to overwhelm him, but steady voice anchored him, guiding him like a compass. She had survived 5 gunshot wounds, death itself, and now she was guiding the very man who had caused her injuries. The flight medic glanced at Briggs, his expression unreadable. "She's stable enough for the OR, but any lapse now and we lose her," he said tersely. Briggs swallowed hard, nodding. He felt the full weight of those words. The battlefield had shifted from the valley to the helicopter, yet the stakes were just as high, just as unforgiving. He moved mechanically, following every instruction offered, trying to silence the storm of guilt and fear inside him. His eyes, half closed but sharp, flickered toward Briggs. Her lips moved, whispering instructions through shallow breaths. "Check vitals, IV flow, keep pressure, focus. You've got this." Each word cut through the roaring sound of the helicopter and the pounding of Briggs's heart. She was alive because of him, yet her presence reminded him of the near-fatal mistake he had made. He followed her instructions to the letter, his mind laser-focused, his body trembling with exhaustion and emotion. As the helicopter descended toward the field hospital, Briggs's thoughts swirled. He remembered the ambush in vivid detail, the bullets flying, the screams, the chaotic fear, and sprinting fearlessly into the open to save the injured. And then the moment he had fired 5 shots, each one a potential death sentence. The weight of that decision had haunted him for the past hours, but now, in the presence of the medic he had almost killed, he realized the full scope of his actions. He had endangered a life, yet he had also been given the chance to save it. The helicopter landed with a jolt, sand and debris kicking up around the landing zone. The surgical team rushed to meet them, moving with practiced precision. Was carefully lifted from the stretcher onto a hospital bed, every movement calculated to avoid worsening her injuries. Briggs followed closely, still shaken, still absorbing the surreal reality. The woman who had bullets and death was still alive, and her survival now depended on rapid, coordinated medical intervention. Once inside the operating room, Briggs hesitated. The surgical team worked quickly, assessing her wounds and prepping for emergency surgery. Despite sedation and exhaustion, remained alert enough to issue brief commands. Monitor BP fluids, stabilize. Each directive was a reminder of her indomitable will. Briggs realized something profound. She was alive not just because of medical skill, but because of the sheer force of her determination. Even in critical condition, she was the guiding hand, the anchor in the storm of chaos. Alone for a moment, Briggs leaned against a wall, trembling. He whispered under his breath, voice thick with emotion, "I'm sorry, I didn't know, I didn't mean." His words were swallowed by the hum of hospital equipment, yet they were real, raw, and necessary. The guilt that had built over hours, the recognition that he had fired upon her, now pressed down like a physical weight. He had almost destroyed the very person whose courage had saved countless lives. His eyes flickered open slightly, and she caught his gaze. Though weak, she offered a small, faint nod. It was acknowledgment, almost forgiveness, a wordless recognition that, despite his actions, he was now her ally in survival. Briggs felt tears prick at the corners of his eyes. He had prepared himself to witness the death of the woman he had doubted, yet here she was, alive and defiant, guiding him even through near-fatal injury. Hours stretched as the surgical team stabilized her condition. Blood transfusions, sutures, and life-saving interventions battled against the damage inflicted by bullets. Remained conscious intermittently, offering brief instructions, her focus unwavering. Every word, every gesture, reinforced the miraculous nature of her survival. Briggs observed quietly, awe and guilt intermingling in equal measure. She had survived the impossible, and his redemption, fleeting and fragile as it was, depended entirely on ensuring that she remained alive. Later, when the operation concluded, was moved to intensive care for continued monitoring. Briggs remained nearby, exhausted, bloodied, and emotionally drained. He had faced death countless times in combat, yet nothing had prepared him for this. The weight of firing upon a comrade, the awe of witnessing her indomitable will, and the complex mix of fear, relief, and admiration that consumed him. Finally, in a quiet moment, Briggs allowed himself to speak. I shot you," he whispered, voice breaking. "I panicked, I didn't know." Weak but conscious, turned her head slightly, her eyes meeting his. She didn't respond immediately, conserving strength, yet her gaze conveyed understanding. After a long pause, she whispered softly, "You kept me alive, that's what matters." Her words, though faint, pierced through Briggs's guilt. It was not forgiveness in the conventional sense, but a recognition of the human reality of war. Mistakes are made, yet courage, determination, and action can redeem them. The squad, observing from nearby, watched silently. They had witnessed the impossible, surviving 5 gunshot wounds, defying death, and guiding the very soldier who had fired upon her. The story would ripple through the unit, becoming legend, not just because of the miracle of survival, but because of the human connection forged in the crucible of combat. Briggs had fired the shots, yet through his dedication to her survival, he had been given a chance to make amends. By nightfall was stabilized, the most critical threats to her life addressed. The field hospital quieted, a stark contrast to the chaos of the valley. Briggs sat nearby, hands trembling, reflecting on the sequence of events. He had faced fear, panic, and the possibility of permanent loss, yet he had witnessed resilience, courage, and the extraordinary will of one remarkable medic. She had survived, and in doing so, had redefined the meaning of bravery, forgiveness, and determination for every soldier present. In the stillness of the hospital, Briggs made a silent vow. He would never forget this lesson. He would carry the weight of his mistake, but he would also honor the life she had fought to preserve, a life he had almost taken and then had the opportunity to save. His courage had transformed the battlefield, the helicopter, the operating room, and Briggs himself. In that moment, he understood something essential. True courage is measured not only by action in battle, but by the strength to forgive, to endure, and to rise when faced with impossible odds. The field hospital was quiet now, the chaos of the day reduced to the rhythmic beeping of monitors and the soft shuffle of nurses moving through the ward. Corporal Doc lay in a narrow bed, her body bruised and bandages covering the wounds that had once seemed impossible to survive. Yet her spirit was intact, unbroken, her eyes alert despite exhaustion. The room smelled faintly of antiseptic, but beneath it lingered the echoes of the desert battlefield, the fear, adrenaline, and courage that had defined the past 24 hours. Sergeant Briggs remained close, seated in a chair that had long since lost its comfort. He was pale, exhausted, and emotionally raw, still processing the enormity of what had occurred. He had fired 5 bullets at bullets that could have ended her life, and yet she had survived, commanding him with calm authority even in critical condition. Now, as she rested in the quiet of recovery, he wrestled with guilt, admiration, and the unspoken bond forged in fire and blood. Stirred, her hand twitching slightly, Briggs leaned closer instinctively. "Hey, you're awake," he whispered, voice low, careful not to startle her. Her eyes blinked, and though the movement was slow, there was recognition there, a flicker of acknowledgement that he existed in this moment not as a threat but as an ally. Briggs swallowed, his throat tight. He had rehearsed what he might say, what he might confess, but words seemed fragile in the face of her survival. I owe you an apology," he began, voice trembling. "I shouldn't have, I panicked, I fired," his words caught in his throat. Gaze held him steady, sharp and assessing, yet patient. "You did what you thought you had to," she rasped, each word labored but deliberate. "But now you're here. You kept me alive." There was no anger, no recrimination in her voice, only recognition of the reality of war and the human will to survive. Briggs exhaled slowly, relief washing over him even as guilt lingered. The next few days became a blur of recovery. Underwent surgeries to repair internal damage, followed by careful monitoring and physical therapy. Each morning she awoke to the sterile lights of the ward, yet her mind remained tethered to the battlefield. Even in recovery, she guided the nurses and medics with the precision of a seasoned field operative. Monitor blood pressure, check vitals, change dressing, steady, calm. Her voice, though quieter than on the battlefield, still carried authority, a testament to the indomitable strength that had carried her through bullets, chaos, and near death. Briggs remained a constant presence. Each day, he assisted where he could, learning, observing, and silently making amends. He adjusted her pillows, prepared hydration, and applied light physical therapy under supervision, following her exact instructions. The repetition of these small acts of care became a ritual of atonement. With every movement, Briggs was reminded of the fragility of life, the consequences of fear, and the extraordinary courage of the woman he had almost killed. During these days, conversations between them were sparse but meaningful. Briggs often spoke softly, recounting details of the ambush in ways that were factual yet tinged with regret. Listened, occasionally correcting minor details, but her focus remained on recovery and the mental necessary after trauma. Slowly, Briggs began to understand the depth of her resilience, not just the physical ability to survive gunshot wounds, but the mental and emotional fortitude that allowed her to lead, forgive, and guide, even in her weakest moments. The squad visited when able, offering words of encouragement and awe. Each member of the unit had been touched by courage, yet none could articulate it fully. They had watched her defy death, command attention in the midst of chaos, and survive bullets that should have ended her life. Now, seeing her recovering, they felt a profound mixture of relief and reverence. Briggs noticed how their eyes lingered on her, the way they spoke quietly when discussing the events of the valley, each whisper a recognition of the extraordinary bravery they had witnessed. One afternoon, Briggs sat by her bed, her hand lightly resting on his. He spoke quietly, the words heavy with emotion. "I keep thinking about the valley, about the moment I fired. I thought I was doing my job, but I almost lost you." His lips curved slightly, a weak but genuine smile. "You didn't lose me," she said softly. "You acted when it counted, that saved me." Her voice was faint, yet the weight of her forgiveness, intentional or otherwise, struck him deeply. Briggs felt a tear slip down his cheek, unashamed, unrestrained. The bond forged in fire and blood was real, unbreakable, and profoundly human. Recovery was slow. Physical therapy demanded patience, endurance, and courage. She worked diligently, pushing through pain to regain mobility and strength. Briggs assisted whenever he could, respecting her boundaries while following instructions carefully. Each session was an echo of the battlefield, precise, disciplined, and fraught with the knowledge that every step forward was a triumph over near death. Their shared silence often spoke more than words. It was a testament to the understanding forged in extremity, the mutual recognition of fear, courage, and human frailty. As weeks passed, regained strength, though scars, both visible and invisible, remained. Her resilience became a model for others in the ward, inspiring both soldiers and medics. Briggs, once burdened by guilt, found a sense of purpose in supporting her, witnessing firsthand the extraordinary power of human will. The bond between them deepened not through spoken words, but through shared understanding, actions, and the quiet acknowledgement of what they had endured together. The moment of forgiveness crystallized one evening. Now able to sit upright and speak clearly, looked at Briggs directly. "You did what you had to," she said. "You saved me in your own way. Don't let guilt consume you. We live because we act, because we survive, because we care." Her words, simple yet profound, struck Briggs at the core. He realized that forgiveness was not a passive act, but an affirmation of life, courage, and human resilience. He nodded silently, tears streaming freely, feeling a weight lift from his shoulders. By the time she was cleared for limited field duty, had not only recovered physically, but had reinforced her reputation as a legend within the unit. Her courage, defiance, and resilience had been witnessed under impossible circumstances, leaving a lasting impression on every soldier present. Briggs, once racked with guilt, had emerged from the experience with a deeper understanding of courage, responsibility, and the extraordinary bond forged in battle. The unit would speak of the incident for years to come: the ambush, the 5 shots fired, the miraculous survival, and the slow, deliberate recovery. Strength became a benchmark for bravery, resilience, and leadership. Briggs's journey from panic and error to redemption and support became a testament to human growth, humility, and the profound lessons learned in the crucible of war. In the quiet moments of the hospital, as sat upright, smiling faintly at the world she had fought so hard to remain part of, Briggs understood the final truth. Courage was not measured solely in actions taken in combat, but in resilience, compassion, forgiveness, and the will to survive against all odds. Embodied all of it, and through her survival, she had reshaped the lives of everyone around her, leaving an indelible mark that would endure far beyond the desert valley, far beyond the battlefield, and far beyond the hospital walls. Months had passed since the Desert Valley incident. The initial chaos, the ambush, the 5 bullets, the medevac, and the intensive care had receded into memory, but the lessons of that day remained vivid, etched into the minds of those who had lived through it. Corporal Doc, once bloodied and barely conscious, had fully recovered. Her strength, resilience, and leadership had only grown sharper, transforming her into a living legend within the unit. Sergeant Briggs had returned to active duty alongside her, though his perspective on courage, responsibility, and human life had changed profoundly. The memory of firing upon haunted him, yet it no longer paralyzed him with guilt. Instead, it fueled his commitment to protect, to act with precision, and to honor the bravery he had witnessed firsthand. He carried the weight of that day as both a reminder and a compass, a guide for every decision in the battlefield, no matter how small or life-altering. Resumed her role as a field medic, mentoring new recruits and instilling in them the lessons learned from near-death experiences. She became more than a healer. She was a symbol of endurance and fortitude, someone who had stared death in the face and refused to yield. Every soldier under her guidance felt the weight of her experience and the depth of her courage. Her stories, though often understated, resonated with clarity. Survival demanded knowledge, focus, and an unbreakable will, and no act of bravery existed in isolation. It was always intertwined with the actions of others. Briggs watched her closely during field exercises, recognizing not only her competence but also the subtle, invisible scars of survival. There were moments when would pause, a faint shadow passing over her face, a memory of bullets and chaos that she carried silently. But those shadows never diminished her resolve. They reminded every soldier that courage was not the absence of fear or pain but the deliberate choice to confront it, to act with clarity, and to persevere regardless of circumstance. The story of that day spread throughout the unit, becoming part of its unofficial lore. Soldiers recounted how it survived 5 close-range gunshot wounds, how she had continued to direct life-saving efforts even while bloodied and battered, and how she had guided Briggs, the very man who had fired upon her, through the immediate crisis. It was a story of miraculous survival, yes, but it was also a story of human resilience, trust, and forgiveness. Every retelling reinforced the lessons learned. In the crucible of combat, courage was measured not only in action, but in endurance, composure, and the ability to lift others even when survival seemed impossible. Briggs, for his part, took a quiet approach to the narrative. He never claimed heroism. In fact, he often emphasized the opposite. His role had been shaped by fear and error, yet guidance and survival had given him a chance to redeem himself. He spoke to younger soldiers about responsibility, the gravity of split-second decisions, and the humbling power of forgiveness. His words carried weight because they were forged in the fire of lived experience, a testament to both human fallibility and the potential for redemption. Herself spoke rarely about the details of her survival. She preferred to focus on lessons rather than dramatics, the importance of preparation, the precision of medical skills under pressure, and the resilience required to continue fighting even after near-death experiences. Yet her presence alone, composed, commanding, and unyielding, conveyed the full scope of what she had endured. Soldiers who trained under her understood that courage was not about reckless bravery, but about measured action, unwavering focus, and the refusal to surrender to fear or despair. Over time, the bond between and Briggs evolved into mutual respect and quiet camaraderie. They no longer spoke constantly of the incident in the desert valley. The weight of those memories was understood, implicit, and honored in small gestures. Briggs would monitor her condition during field exercises, assist with medical simulations, and quietly ensure she was safe, while continued to push herself and her team to the limits of their skill and endurance. Their shared experience had created a bond stronger than words, a connection forged in chaos, survival, and mutual reliance. The squad, too, felt the legacy of that day. Soldiers who had witnessed near-fatal injuries and miraculous recovery carried the lesson into every mission. They understood that survival was not solely a product of physical skill, but of composure, courage, and the will to fight under impossible circumstances. The story of and Briggs became part of the unit's collective consciousness, a benchmark of bravery, accountability, and human resilience. Veterans would retell the tale in quiet moments, emphasizing not the spectacle but the profound lessons embedded within: trust, precision, courage, and the delicate interdependence of lives in combat. Years later, when eventually transitioned from active duty to training and mentoring roles, her reputation had grown to legendary status. New recruits would hear of the medic who survived 5 bullets, who commanded a battlefield while bleeding, and who forgave a soldier who had fired upon her. But the story was not merely one of survival. It was a story of transformation, the human capacity for resilience, the delicate balance between error and redemption, and the enduring power of courage under fire. Briggs continued to serve, carrying the lessons he had learned into every engagement, every decision, and every interaction with fellow soldiers. The memory of that desert valley remained vivid, but it was no longer solely a memory of fear or guilt. It was a guide, a lesson, and a reminder that human courage and determination could defy even the most impossible odds. He had witnessed the extraordinary will of, and that experience shaped the soldier, the mentor, and the man he would become. The desert valley itself became almost mythic in their memory. It was a place of fear, bullets, chaos, and life-or-death decisions, yet also a place where courage, resilience, and forgiveness were fully realized. Every soldier who returned from that day carried a part of the lesson with them. The knowledge that survival depended not only on skill but on the human spirit, the bonds forged in extreme conditions, and the ability to act decisively under pressure. The valley was silent now, but its legacy resonated in every heart, every decision, and every act of bravery that followed. In quiet reflection, Briggs often thought of the moment he fired those bullets. The guilt had not disappeared, nor should it have. It was a reminder of the fragility of life and the weight of every decision. But it was tempered by the awe and admiration he held for the woman who survived against all odds, forgave without words, and reshaped the course of his life. That balance between regret and respect, between error and redemption, became the guiding principle of his service. 2. Reflected on her survival not as a singular triumph, but as part of a larger human narrative. She had endured pain, fear, and injury, yet she had been aided by courage, skill, and the willingness of others to act decisively. Her story was one of interdependence. Bravery was meaningless without trust, survival was impossible without support, and redemption was a fragile, precious gift. In every classroom she taught, every field exercise she led, and every new recruit she mentored, these lessons were quietly imparted. Ultimately, the story of that desert valley, the ambush, the bullets, the medevac, and the hospital recovery became more than a tale of survival. It became a story of humanity under fire, the extraordinary courage of a single medic, the redemption of a soldier burdened by his mistakes, and the enduring legacy of lessons learned in extremity. For every soldier who witnessed it, for every recruit who later heard of it, the tale remained a benchmark, a reminder that courage is not measured solely by action, but by resilience, composure, forgiveness, and the indomitable will to survive. As the years passed, and Briggs, each carrying the memory of that day, understood that the true measure of heroism was not in surviving bullets or winning battles, but in how one acted in the aftermath, how one forgave, how one learned, and how one honored the lives intertwined with one's own. The desert valley faded from sight, but its lessons endured, echoing in every decision, every act of courage, and every heartbeat of those who had witnessed the extraordinary resilience of the human spirit.